Hey everybody, Eric Schweitzer for The Gamer, and I'm here today with Editor-in-Chief Stacy Henley to talk about The Last of Us Part 2 Remastered. Hi, Stacy.
Hello.
So there's a lot of components to this one,
Yeah.
but first of all, I'm wondering what's your opinion on all the different versions of The Last of Us?
So it's funny that you say the different versions. I really, really like The Last of Us Part 2. Part of the reason I haven't give this overall thing a score is because The Last of Us Part 2 is one of the few games that I would unquestionably say is a 5-star game.
Mm-hmm.
So I really love the journey that one goes on. Last of Us Part 1, or just obviously originally it was just The Last of Us. I've always liked it, I've always thought it was good. It hasn't quite been on the level that some other people put it on. Um, but generally, I would say enjoy the series, and especially this sequel. I have had quite a big problem with Naughty Dog remaking and remastering them, or whatever you want to call it, over the years.
Yeah.
More so because Naughty Dog have always been really since The Last of Us, if not slightly beforehand, with Uncharted, and even really going back to the original Crash Bandicoot, always kind of pushed forward with tech. I know it hasn't always been easy. I know there's sometimes been obviously the crunch and lots of other negative things that we associate with the industry. But basically, Naughty Dog has been the studio, I think even more than Rockstar, who has pulled the industry into this is the new standard of doing things. And it's a shame, really, that they've spent the last half a decade making a multiplayer game that no one's ever going to see,
Mm-hmm.
and repolishing two games that most fans and journalists would already say are perfect tens. I'm in the
Right.
minority for saying that I don't quite love The Last of Us Part 1 as much. Most people would praise them very, very highly. So I think continually giving them a new paint job over and over again, I don't really enjoy. Obviously, the benefit of this one is it comes with the extra features. But if this was just we've upscaled it, with 4K resolution, etc., I wouldn't be interested. It's the other stuff that they've added to this one that makes it worthwhile.
Yeah. So I guess that's the first place to start because when people hear The Last of Us Part 2 Remastered, they're
Yeah,
immediately going to think of the technical upgrades. And, this was a end of life PS4 game, so it looked as good as a PS4 game could look.
absolutely.
And it probably, unless you're looking at them side by side, which we're going to show a little bit of that here, it's probably not easy to tell that this is a visual or like technical upgrade.
Yeah, it's very different to Dead Space, Resident Evil,
Mm.
even something going even further back, like System Shock that we saw last year, that were really overhauls, or even staying in the kind of Naughty Dog ballpark, Crash Bandicoot, the Insanity trilogy. So
Right.
playing it, I watching the side by side, there is a bit of a difference that you can see. But playing it, I didn't ever feel blown away by it. This looks so great. It just looked like how I remember The Last of Us,
Hmm.
because I remembered it looking great. I remembered it being, it came out at the same time as Ghost of Tsushima, and it kind of felt like, why do we need a new console? Like, this is what the PS4 is capable of. So yeah, visuals, they're as good as they were, which were very good, but that's not the draw here for me, and I don't think it will be for many people.
So Druckmann has, director Neil Druckmann has advertised this as the Criterion Collection of The
Yeah.
Last of Us Part 2. How true does that ring to you?
Um, with the Lost levels, I do kind of see it, which we'll get into, but Druckmann doesn't do those. For the kind of commentary bits that are in the main game, it's less like that, and it's more like The Simpsons. And that's not necessarily a major criticism, because I love The Simpsons, but I used to every year, back when DVDs were still a thing. Now, children, if you don't know what DVDs are, they were like discs that had movies on them. Every year I used to get The Simpsons, whatever season it was that they were up to, for Christmas. And I would watch the whole season, which I'd already seen several times on television, and then watch it again with the director's commentary on. And it wasn't really any commentary on the show, it was just like four of the writers hanging out and having a laugh. It was a podcast before podcasts were a thing.
Yeah.
And when you watch the developer's commentary, in the main campaign, or it's only over the cutscene. It's not over any of the playable action. That's still just you playing and the soundtrack. But when you watch it over the cutscenes, it's just a bunch of the people from The Last of Us just kidding around and like, hey, remember the fun we had this day? It's interesting. If you're a major Last of Us fan, it's some kind of connection there, but it doesn't feel the refined, polished inside look at how this masterpiece came together that I feel like we weren't promised, but it was hinted at. In the same way that the Part 1 remastered never actually said it will have The Last of Us Part 2 gameplay,
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that was what people expected, and at the same, I feel like it's the same here. A lot of people are expecting the developers' commentary to be an inside look, this Criterion Collection elevation of the experience, and it's just a bunch of pals hanging out.
Okay, so to break it down a bit,
Yeah.
there's three of these lost levels, which are like basically the video game equivalent of a deleted scene.
Yes.
And within those lost levels, there's these like commentary tracks, right?
So, as you wander around the lost levels, there are little icons that you can go to, little speech bubbles in the air, and when you click on them, one specific person, usually the level designer for that level or the writer, somebody specific to that experience, they will speak to you for a little bit about it. And there's in the shortest one there's 5, and the longest one there's 16, I think.
Hmm.
So there's a decent amount of them, but that's only for the lost levels. Yeah.
Okay, and then what's the one that's all of the people together talking?
So when you replay the main campaign, you can choose whether to have developer commentary on or off, and if you have it on during every single cutscene, every time when you're not in control of the game, it will click on and you will hear them. You can also choose to watch it all just like a movie, just skip all of the gameplay. But whichever version you do, every time there's a cutscene, this music fades and in comes it's Druckmann, Haley Gross, Troy Baker, and Ashley Johnson. Don't think Laura Bailey's involved, but the voices kind of mesh together in the end. Um, so they come in during the cutscenes of the main campaign, and that's not tailored to what you're doing.
And it's just the four of them sort of just vamping over the cutscenes.
Yeah, a lot of times someone will be about to say something interesting, and then someone else will cut them off with like a joke. And it's not there's not one main offender for that. It's not like one of the particular people is a real pain to be around. They all
Sure.
just clearly know each other very well. In the same way that when we've done big shows here, we've done the Game Awards review last year. There was 5 of us. We had um, we had a lot of fun, kind of joking around with each other, but if we were doing that over a video game, if we were doing comedy over a video game, it'd probably get annoying to just hear us kind of enjoy ourselves. And that's kind of the feeling that you get. It's just some kind of co-workers slash friends who are having a lot of fun watching reruns of something, and you're just
Yeah.
there. It's Mystery Science Theater, but they're not funny.
Okay. Okay. Can you talk a little bit more about what the lost levels are?
Yeah. So you get 3 lost levels, as we mentioned. All 3 of them are Ellie, which I find a little bit of a disappointment because I prefer the Abby section of the game, not just in terms of the gameplay, but I think it's overlooked because some people go on too much about The Last of Us, and therefore just kind of settles around and not getting as much credit as I think it deserves. But I feel the decision to let you play as Abby was always a really brave choice, and I would have loved to have heard the justification for why certain decisions were made, the mirroring. I would love to have seen something around the zebra scene, for example, because that's obviously a very obvious mirror of the giraffe. We don't get that. We get the first one is Ellie in Jackson before she kisses Dina. So that's just kind of wandering around, and that's kind of a fun like icebreaker, I suppose. You can use the brick throwing and bottle throwing system to play some fairground games. The snowball fight that's in the game that originally wasn't there. It was going to be a game of clicker tag. Ellie closes her eyes and kind of roars like a clicker, like Marco Polo, basically.
Hmm.
Um, which I think is a. I don't like the world building in The Last of Us. I think it's the worst part of it. Like they remember that Jurassic Park had a sequel, but they don't remember the gay pride flag. It's really weird.
Yeah.
That builds its world. So seeing them do this clicker tag thing, I thought would have been really interesting to leave in. There's a workbench, but instead of building a gun, you make a cocktail. And then the commentary says kind of they cut the whole mechanic of like gathering herbs and chipping ice because it was kind of it was too clever of an idea. It was just kind of drawn out. So that's
Mm.
interesting in isolation because it lets you know kind of how the mechanics of it work. The second one I think is the weakest. It's the sewer. It's just a whole section that they basically cut from the game where Ellie goes from point A to point B, and you can cut it out, and it doesn't make any difference to the story. It's just a puzzle basically. She's stuck in a sewer. She has to figure out how to kind of where to go next. And what that one does a lot is it speaks on a very game design level. So like there was we went forward, and there was a door, and I went in the door and it was a dead end, and I clicked the button, and the commentary was like, most players go through this door even though it's a dead end because you know you kind of got the point of what they were doing.
Mm.
Like in here, there's bullets and other resources, so you get a bit of a reward for exploring. Then as you leave the door, you'll see a tunnel immediately in front of your face, and that's like the correct way to go. So that's a lot more mechanical. The one takeaway from that is there was a section with kind of swimming on different, you had to lower the water so you could reach a higher pipe, otherwise you couldn't reach it. And that was eventually kind of dumbed down basically after focus testing because people were getting stuck and frustrated. And probably I've just said world building was the weakest part. I truly like this game, even though I feel I'm criticized. When we get to No Return, I'll have a lot more positive things to say. No, but I feel like one of the things that Last of Us gets criticized for a lot is it's very by focus test, by numbers, kind of everything's been checked and double checked and triple checked to make sure that no
Right.
player ever gives up on the game. I think they're not afraid to take narrative risks, but I think mechanically and creatively in that sense, they always want to make sure everyone's going to be along for the ride, and I think that's sometimes to the detriment. So seeing them explain the process of how they tweaked and retweaked again a section around focus testing. I still don't really agree with that type of game design, but you know they made The Last of Us and I didn't, so they probably
Yeah.
about how games work. And it's an interesting, almost right of reply for Naughty Dog. Everyone kind of criticizes them for this a lot. So to have them explain that decision, I think really highlights not necessarily the point of these last levels, because I don't think there's enough of them, but what these can kind of offer from the developer side. Because DayZ is a fan to say, we want to see more, we want to see loads more. Like, I love leaks, I love finding out what's happening at games.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is an interesting one from a developer point of view to say they have the time and space to say, this is a thing we are often criticized for. Here is how we feel it makes the game better. Here is how we've changed it. You can experience the different versions that we had of it, and we think you will agree with us that it should have been cut.
Mm-hmm.
So that's quite interesting. There's also a scene. I don't know if I want to spoil it. I know it's just the last levels; they're not really in the game. I'm going to err on the side of not spoiling it and say, if this had stayed in the game, I think it would have been my favorite moment in the series that they
Wow.
put with this puzzle, which they could have added in later. They could have moved this idea and put it somewhere else. So it's a shame that they didn't, I suppose. Um, and then the third one, the shortest one, is the hunt. This one we see that I think the commentary says it's the fifth iteration, but even by the time we see it, so it's already gone through some of the changes. We don't get to see any of those changes. Um, and it's set just after the scene where Abby and Ellie fight each other, and then obviously in the real game, you flash to the farm. Ellie's
Mm.
JJ, and you kind of see Ellie's life afterwards. This one instead starts with her hunting in the forest for a boar. She's tracking a boar. And it tells us kind of originally there was like 3 stages of the boss fight. It was more like an old school kind of RPG style big fight, and they then felt that was kind of the wrong time to do it just after the fight with Abby, which kind of acted as the big fight of the game, and also it felt too much like an arcadey video game style boss. So what happens is the boar is severely wounded. we track it through the wood. You kind of follow it through the streaks of blood, and it's like a lot of the places in The Last of Us. It's kind of open world in that it's not an alleyway, but you quickly realize it's not. There's a very set path for you to follow, and yeah, you hunt the boar down. It's kind of squealing in pain. It's not like a victorious thing. It's kind of comedy. So it's supposed to be like a haunting thing. And then we see Ellie eventually tracks the boar. You have kind of a you're in a convenience store, so it then gets much tinier. You kill it, and when she eventually does kill the boar, she then returns to Dina with rabbits. So she's tracked and hunted this wild beast, full of meat, and then for whatever reason doesn't bring that home with her. So I think still this kind of uh, one, the kind of pent up violence that obviously is what propels her to go to Santa Monica and go after Abby when Tommy comes with news, but also this kind of regret around the violence that she kind of that she perpetrates just kind of constantly. I the commentary basically says we didn't like this and the lamb for the PTSD. We felt one of them was the way representing it with animals twice. They didn't feel it was very effective. They chose to stick with the lamb and to kind of wrap it very tightly around being at the farm rather than giving us gameplay. The grass is kind of always greener. I'm not sure that was the right decision. I think a lot of people didn't like playing as Abby and having to fight Ellie. So I think then changing it to playing as Ellie and having Ellie again be the bad guy,
Mm-hmm.
I feel would have been more effective. But then it's quite effective that we don't really get full control of Ellie until we're on the tail of Abby and Lev. So I don't know with that one. That one's left me with the most questions, which makes it the most interesting.
Right. Yeah. That's sort of the point.
Yes, 100%.
And are these like fully polished scenarios that would have just slotted right into the game?
They they aren't on the visual level of The Last of Us, but they're not like in a blocky polygon. It's not like in the past when some video games have I think Skate did it a couple of years ago when it was very clear like this is a 3D mesh. There's no backgrounds in place. The textures aren't fitting. It looks the way a lot of games that came out last year would have been quite proud to look. I think
Okay.
it's missing the final touches, and I think especially in the facial expressions, like when Ellie speaks, her mouth doesn't move. So there's like those kind of details, but it's pretty far along to the point where I suspect, even though this is Naughty Dog opening its doors and saying, "Come and look at the things that we cut," it still feels like it's been quite protective of that. Like I say, we don't get to see any of the previous iterations of this ball fight. There's nothing of Abby. Everything still looks pretty good. There's no single screen that you could clip out of context and go, "Oh, Sony ponies." Like it still looks pretty good, and
Yeah.
I think that might be deliberate.
As far as the commentary goes, is there any of that in just the regular game too? Like the
No,
word ball? See, I feel like
me too.
that would be a very worthwhile experience if we could get the director commentary throughout the regular game and not just these levels that weren't good enough to put in the game.
Yeah, I will say that I've focused on one doing the last levels, two doing no return, and three kind of going through the cutscene and things. So it would surprise me if there was any kind of corners that I haven't found because I kind of replayed some of the big sections.
Yeah.
I didn't sit and play the whole thing from start to finish with the commentary on because I was replaying scenes, I was capturing footage, I was getting screenshots for comparison and different things. So I didn't have time to dedicate the kind of 30 hours, 25 hours that it takes to go from A to B, record the whole thing, and look in every single corner for a dev corner. But I never ever found any, and I think after a while I kind of realised, well, there's like none in the first 2 days. I think it's safe to assume there's none.
There isn't any.
Yeah.
Yeah. I if to me that leaves the door open for a third re-release of The Last of Us Part 2 cuz that I think that would be not it would be very unique and I think that would be a really worthwhile way to replay the game.
Yeah,
Okay.
I was expecting that. That was part of the reason I say why I didn't roll through the whole thing was because It was
It's
just
just the
replaying it.
same
Yeah, it
game.
wasn't anything
Yeah.
from it other than the cutscenes. And when I realized you could watch the cutscenes like a movie and get that commentary, that was less jarring because you weren't going in and out.
Yeah.
You were jumping around in time a little bit, but you were staying with the same group of people and having that conversation, listening to that conversation all the way through.
Right. And you can imagine that's how they recorded it too.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk about No Return. That's what
Yeah,
it's called, right?
yes, it is.
This is the roguelike mini game that you get. What do you think of that?
I loved it. My one criticism of it, just to get that kind of out of the way, because this is now the section where I can say this is really worthwhile. Go and buy this thing.
Hmm.
Um, Coming off Valhalla, where they try to kind of stitch some kind of story into it, there's a point to it all.
Yeah.
There's no point to any of this. There's no reason for you to be having these fights. The game doesn't even throw a flimsy one together. It's just a video game.
It's
Um,
mercenaries.
yeah. Hmm.
Mhm. Okay.
Um, But yeah, everything else about it I think is really creative. It does reuse the same map, so if you do play endlessly, that might kind of grant you. There's only 4 modes as well. You do 6 levels per run. There's only 4, so you'll at least have. Well, the last one's always a boss, so you'll have at least one repeat all the way through. But no, the structure of how it works, the characters you can play as, the variety, the different things the game gives you. I think it's really nice to see Naughty Dog just do a video game,
Yeah.
um, rather than. I know it's a Chris. I've just said to Chris that it's not too tied up in the story, but I think that has given them a little bit of freedom that we maybe wouldn't otherwise have gotten, for them to have a little bit more fun with it. But then that could be pushed a little bit further as well. I think if that's the direction they're going in.
Yeah, because like an arcade like roguelike sort of time trial-y kind of thing. It's not a very Naughty Dog kind of game.
No, not at all. And it goes further than that. Like each level is different. They call them mods, and I can't remember what one's called. Gambits. In each level. So sometimes that's as simple as enemies have a little extra health, or if you vault over something, you get a speed boost. Pretty dull. But other times it's like if you kill an enemy, they're going to explode over everyone,
Hmm.
or Molotov cocktails rain down from the sky, or the pustules that the bloaters pull off themselves and throw at you. They just rain from the sky sometimes, like snowballs.
Okay.
And there's
So it's like
some,
the Last of Us Hunger Games.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it goes pretty like intense into it. Like some of the there's like an axe that sets you on fire. They really have done a lot with trying to keep obviously the basic gameplay that they have in the main game while giving it something very different
Hmm.
in its approach.
Yeah, and you already mentioned Valhalla, but it is a little inconvenient that Valhalla just came out because that it's easy to compare them, but Valhalla is so integrated into the game.
Yeah,
It's such a like important extension of Ragnarok, whereas like this is just kind of goofball time.
yeah. This adds nothing to the experience. Like I think when God of War, the next God of War comes out, um, probably it won't be the Norse stuff anymore. But I think people replaying it will say, "I'm going to play it Ragnarok and then do Valhalla." I think
Right.
it's just part of the thing. In the same way that people preparing for The Last of Us, you have to do Left Behind.
Hmm.
Like it's just part of the experience. You have to do it. This is not. This is just fun.
Yeah.
But if Ragnarok had come out last January, or if we were having this conversation in summer, I don't think I would reach as easily for the comparison.
Right.
It's just they're both first party studios who both added an expansion quite a way, outside of the immediate release window, obviously a lot later for The Last of Us, that has the same genre.
And so and how does it perform as a roguelike? How does the progression hit you?
So there's two. No, there's not. There's 3 styles of progression. The first one is your characters. So you start off with just Ellie and Abby. You have to do it's usually 3. You do 3 successful encounters. That's not full runs. That's just like the levels. So each run is 6, so they're pretty easy to do 3. Then you get, if you do with Ellie, you get Dina. You then do with Dina, you get Jesse. Jesse, you get Tommy. Tommy, you get Joel. And then with Abby, it's Abby and then Lev, Yara, Mel, and Manny. Owen is not here, which will be good news for most people because most people hate Owen.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm one of those people. So good news, there's no Owen. So that's the first part. The second part is you start off with, usually the one you start off with is called Assault, which is 3 waves of enemies, usually 3 and then 4 and then 5 in whatever map. So you kill 3 enemies, then they respawn, you kill 4, then they respawn. That's your first one done.
Mm.
Then you can, it's always a multi-choice, it's always this or that, but at a certain point you kind of locked into the path. So when you pick your first choice, you're not just picking what you have next, you're picking what are the next 3 going to be.
Mm-hmm.
And once you get a bit further through that, they split into another one as well. But yeah, the obvious part is you go from the start. You start with, every character has a unique gun that they start with. Tommy, it's sniper rifle. With Ellie, it's the pistol. With Jesse, for some reason, it's the pipe bomb, which I think is a weird one to just kick off with. Lev obviously has the bow. And then as you go through the game, you get coins for completing these gambits for things like kill enemies with headshots, and just each level has a different amount of currency you get from it, depending on its difficulty. And there's a store which is randomized. So usually there's one gun and then like recipes to make trip mines, health packs, something like that. So you are relying a little bit on luck to make sure you get the right gun. One of Ellie's reward as you go through, there's different challenges to unlock skins or gun wraps. Ellie's was to get all of the guns Ellie can get in one run, and I did I think 4 perfect runs and just didn't get the guns come through. Or
Oh wow.
like the flamethrower is quite expensive, so I got the flamethrower first, but I couldn't afford it, and it didn't come back into the store. So the storefront kind of adds that too. And obviously, if you die, you restart completely. There's nothing carries over. Your characters don't get any stronger, any better. They don't unlock anything other than skins. It's all aesthetic, the things they unlock.
And
So
how
you
long
always
is it run?
Half an hour, 40 minutes.
Okay.
So not kind of not a huge time thing, but not a kind of pick up and play kind of deal either. And considering there's only 6 levels in that means you're in each one for quite a while. Obviously, with something like Hades, they have a lot of very quick levels that you can get through in a couple of minutes. Whereas this one, they take longer. There's one level called Hunted where you just have to survive for 2 minutes. That's obviously quite quick, but it's also quite hard. But the rest of them can take much longer. By the end of the Assault one, it's not 3, 4, and 5. It's like 5 and 2 rounds of 6. And they're quite tough enemies at that point, so they can take quite a while. So yeah, I think they're starting over.
It really does sound like you're describing Resident Evil Mercenaries.
Yeah, I mean, the only reason that I'm comparing it to Valhalla is because of the links we've said. It basically is Mercenaries.
But Mercenaries is pure carnage, and I have to assume that the Last of Us version is a lot more stealth focused.
Yes, it's almost, I think, to its detriment, because you're trying very hard to conserve bullets, and because you're in quite small maps, obviously The Last of Us, a lot of the time you are constantly on the move, you're pushing through a place to get to the next step on the way, whereas this traps you in a very small space. One of them is the TV studio, and at times it can be like 20 enemies in there, and in the base game there's nowhere near that level. So there's definitely an over-reliance on melee kills, sneaking up behind people. The silencer then becomes very valuable. Obviously the bow or the crossbow offer a little bit of that as well, because they are quieter than the shotgun. I think Manny starts with a shotgun. So it's definitely a challenge to do things that way. That actually, one of the most interesting things with that is all of the characters have their own unique weapon, but Yara's weapon is just Lev. So when you play as Yara, you automatically get Lev with you. So in some of the other characters, just at random points, just like a help and hand, where it's not triggered by difficulty, it's just a reward or one of these mods. It'll say Joel will be here to help you, or Abby will be here, or whoever. But with Yara, all 6 levers there, and as you upgrade, what you're actually upgrading is lev. So
Okay.
for other people, you can upgrade how well they aim, how fast they craft things, um, those sorts of things. But with Yara, what you upgrade is Lev will be more aggressive, Lev will be more accurate, Lev will be has more health or something like that. So um, I think the way that they use the characters give everyone a sense of personality. Um, Helps bring it, like you say, away from the carnage of mercenaries and into trying to play as a specific person. So, like Joel and Tommy, for example, they can't dodge any melee attacks because
Mm.
they're old men. They've just
Mm.
got to tank it. So, I think it tries to stay quite true to the characters. Um, like these allies, they don't work together across the divide. You can't play as Joel and have Abby helping you, for example.
Mm.
So it's definitely more refined, I would say, reserved.
How much time do you think to play it out?
Um, I was successful. I got to the end on my third or fourth run. It's not that difficult. Obviously, I played on. I bounced between kind of very light to see what that was like, and then light, and then moderate, and then thought, I'm actually not going any. I don't need to prove anything to anybody. um, so, because I try always to review a thing on whatever the default is, which is moderate, and then for the Ellie thing, I was like, right, I'm just doing it on very light and getting through this thing because I need to unlock these skins. I want Ellie dressed up as a spaceman, so gimme. Um, but yeah, I would say to get through the whole thing, a run will not take you very long if you can have any good at the game. Getting to the end of your first run is fine. The issue is you'll want to unlock all the characters. You
Hmm.
will want to unlock all of the skins for all the characters and all of the guns. Each character has between 3 to 5 challenges, and you can't do them simultaneously. You unlock them in turn. So that means several runs as the same character a lot of the time. And there's also 6 bosses at the end. So the bosses aren't randomized. You will first fight the arcade bloater, who's quite easy. Then it's the theater bit at the end with Ellie and Abby, except it's full of stalkers. Then the Rattler Captain, who I hate, that was my least favorite one because the dogs just constantly attack you. I hate the dogs
Mm.
so much.
Yeah.
And that revs up, and eventually you fight the Rat King, who's obviously quite a lot harder than the arcade bloater. So it's not just a case of okay, I've done a run. It took me half an hour, 3 tries. I finished it as Abby. I'm done. It's not. It doesn't have the like I say the rewards of Valhalla or Hades, where there's some point to it.
Hmm.
But beating it once as Abby is like great. You've now unlocked one character, maybe 2 skins along the way, and one of the 5 bosses.
Mm.
And you have to earn these mods as well. These like I said, the Molotov cocktail things. You have to do levels with other mods in to unlock other mods. So I think I spent about 6 or maybe even 8 hours on it. I have all of the characters, all of the mods, all of the gambits, all of that unlocked. Um, all of the skins for the Abby side, just because Mel and Manny are much easier, I found to play as than Joel and Tommy, because Joel and Tommy can't dodge, which makes a melee focused run really difficult.
Yeah.
So I don't have all the Ellie characters done, but yeah, 8 hours
Eight
ish, a bit
hours.
less, and I've done unlocked pretty much everything from it.
It's hard to argue at $10 for all this stuff,
Yeah,
even if you can sort of nitpick and wonder what it would be like if it was a little bit cooler, or um, $10 is $10, right?
yeah. I mean, there's no question about whether or not this is worth it. Obviously, when we usually do reviews, we just kind of say it's this number out of 10, and then you kind of make up your own mind whether or not to buy it. It's
Yeah.
hard with this one because it's The Last of Us. There's just kind of a not a ceiling. That's the top one. There's kind of a floor on the rating of this. It's very good. So I think for the price, yeah, just if you care about The Last of Us at all, which you've been listening to us for over half an hour, you obviously do.
Probably do.
You should get this.
Do you see this as the beginning of a trend, or do you hope that this sort of grows into a kind of an industry standard way to tackle remasters?
I always like remasters that give you a little bit more. Obviously, I know they can't all do Final Fantasy VII remake, where we're completely changing the story, and it's going to be a trilogy, and every game's going to be 50 hours long, and it's. But I've never really liked the remakes and remasters that just seem to exist for the sake of it. And I
Yeah.
think that's a sense that a growing number of the audience kind of have, especially after. It doesn't necessarily need to be this. I guess we'll call it a Criterion collection, but it doesn't necessarily need to be this kind of Naughty Dog way of here's some stuff we've cut, here's an extra roguelite mode. But it's just something that bridges the gap, I think, between a remake and a remaster. Because something like Final Fantasy is an extreme example, but even something like Resident Evil 4, which we've discussed, that really goes beyond just we've polished it. It's
Right.
a new game, really. That just follows the same beats. That feels more like a remake that you'd see in the movie industry. So I would like to see more remasters that just have a little bit of extra, even if it's something that the devs can do fairly easily, like this, like commentary. That's obviously fairly cheap to do. But that's much cheaper than making a whole new roleplay mode. Even though No Return is my favorite part, it's like the industry standard that I'd want would be the lost levels and the commentary.
Hmm.
Just something that makes it more worthwhile.
I I almost think I do think that they have kind of a marketing problem with this one, because to the normie, they're immediately going
Yeah,
to say, why do I need a remaster of a 3-year-old game? I feel like it should have been called something. It should have been called Last of Us Part 2 Plus or something.
yeah. I think I can't remember who wrote the article about it on the Gamer, but director's cut I think would be a good fit for that. I know they did that for Ghost of Tsushima, and it wasn't really needed. That didn't feel like a director's cut. That felt like just um, Game of the Year edition. Whether that you just
Yeah,
don't really
and
do
Death
Game of the Year editions
Stranding
anymore,
too.
um, but yeah, when I first came out, I think I wrote an article saying like, I don't like what Naughty Dog's doing. I still feel that way in general about the overall direction of the studio. I hope that behind closed doors, I'm being rapidly proven wrong.
Hmm.
But yeah, I think the advantage that it has in that sense is the cost. If they were selling this as a new thing for $70, then I think we'd have a different conversation about is it worth it. And I think I'd be on the fence about it because it's a peek inside. It's this new mode. They're selling the whole game for that price. Um, but I think for $10, there is some kind of a marketing problem with it. But at the same time, I think the price is low enough that that conversation becomes a lot easier.
Sure. Yeah. Well, we're gonna do another discussion on this one once more of us have had a chance to play it.
Yes, because you've not played it yet. You've just been listening to me.
Have not played it, but when it comes out in a few days, we'll do another chat with a bigger group and get into the nitty gritty of No Return and stuff. So I'm excited about that. But thanks for the rundown. Your review is not scored, is that right?
Yes, I've done an overall review of like the whole thing, and then I've done a separate write up about No Return because that's where I spent the majority of my time. I didn't really want to score either of them because I think they're all part of a complete product that has a 5-star game with them. So it's hard.
Yeah, that's fair. Any last thoughts then?
Um, I just think for the price point of this and for the stuff that it does, I would love to see $10 add-on with extra content become a thing that we can move towards. I think I would be a lot less cynical about the remake
Hmm.
trend if that was how it worked.
Okay. Well, that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. You can find both the full review and the review for No Return linked down in the description. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, hit that bell, and visit us at thegamer.com. That's the gamer, no space.